for attending, and apologies again for the technical world. It's computing. So in compliance, we've been around compliance and focused on compliance issues, particularly around learning and compliance now, highly focused for about the last 2 years. But when I look at compliance, I really had to sort of think back and think, how does compliance really affect me every day? And in a current role, I couldn't find where that affected me too much. So it really doesn't come into my mindset throughout the day at all. So I had to kind of look back a little bit and think, when was a point in time that compliance actually made some sort of an impact? And I really sort of took this quote at heart to say that unless we're affected by some sort of compliance issue, we don't really think about it on a day-to-day basis. So I went back a few years, way before my time in the computing world, and in a past job, I used to have something to do with these guys. Now, if you are in the Australian world, these were the real Australian Air Force roulettes when they used to fly real planes. And my job, apart from having a great time sitting in the back seat attending air shows every weekend, was really to be a maintenance person on these. And that job entailed me to walk out to the aircraft in the morning, do a quick walk around, rattle a few doors, polish the windows, check the oil, and that's pretty much known as a pre-flight check. And of course, I've been trained to do this, and I've been monitored and certified to do this sort of training and this sort of check on the aircraft. So when I finish my component, I walk back into the office and I sign the fact that I've actually done the check in accordance to the checklist that's been required. So my signature is recorded against the flight maintenance book. The next thing that happens is the pilot comes in, signs the aircraft, does another really quick walk around, not as intense as mine, jumps in the aircraft and goes off flying. And these guys do quite a bit of practice. So we expect that when they take off, we won't see them for maybe an hour and a half as they used to practice their routines. So that means for me, I can go back, sit down, have a coffee. A lot of people play cards, and we don't really think much about it. Then we get the message that my aircraft has actually landed. And what I would have to do then is get off from my coffee, go out, walk around the aircraft again, refuel it, do another check. The only problem is on this day, and it was quite a few years ago now, my aircraft actually landed a little bit like this. And unfortunately for me, two of the aircraft I looked at in that morning collided in midair, killing both pilots. And this was way back in the early 80s, so this is how long this sort of experience has stayed with me. And, I get to a point where as soon as this sort of information is released, that book that I signed in the morning is immediately taken and locked away. So that's the first thing that happens. The second thing that happens is that book gets looked at fairly extensively on whose signature is in the flight check in the morning. And on this fateful day, it happened to be mine. So then what happens is, and this is in the days way before e-learning, your entire training record, so the training department gets a call, and all your training records are searched and maintained and locked in the same safe. So the next stage is the equivalent of sitting in a room with a dark room with a light over you, asking you lots of questions, testing your knowledge, taking you back out to the aircraft and rechecking to see that you actually do know how to do that check. And more importantly, where in the manual it states where the check is. So you have to know the position in the manual. So fortunately for me, I was clean. I did my job correct, and the error was all around pilot error. So here is a compliance experience that I had 30 odd years ago that I still remember to today. So as I said, if you don't experience compliance, even in your day-to-day job, you probably don't even think about it. But there are certainly lots of people that do think about it. So today we're going to talk about that compliance and talk about a few clients and some interesting scenarios that they deal with in terms of compliance. And then we'll have a look at, how we deal with it as a technology platform. And you may have a different platform and they may deal with it differently. And all we'll show is how we deal with it and how we link all of these together so it makes it easy for an administrator and a manager to see the statistics of people at any one time. I always say that compliance isn't a problem. A problem is actually non-compliance. So if you're in a compliant state, everything is okay. If you manage to get into a non-compliant status and you happen to be audited at that point in time, that's when the trouble starts. If you take the pharmaceutical industry, under an FDA regulation, if they're in a non-compliance at any point in time, they lose their license to operate, which means they cannot produce the drug until everything is fixed, usually costing millions of dollars. So, but non-compliance really goes deeper than fines. And in the case of my experience, unfortunately, the two guys lost their lives. And it was really due again to a routine process piloting error. So for them, they were non-compliant in the way that they flew on that day. Could be an error in judgment. So we just look at now industries where we think are compliance orientated or what we call high consequence industries. So we as a company of Net Dimensions made a decision a couple of years ago to align our system only to high consequence industries. So if you're in retail or something like that, then we're probably not the best LMS for you. If you're in any of these industries, we certainly are lining up to the challenges that you face in these industries. So let's talk about these guys. If you don't know about Synthes, they're a medical hardware company, very, very strange type world to be in. And they do have salespeople, and salespeople are really on the go, ready to sell and get their product out into the market. The only issue on the guys at Synthes is, they create things like this. So Synthes creates the hardware that put your body back together, either through getting old or even worse if you'd had an accident. So they sell the hardware for these things. The most interesting part about these guys is their salespeople actually sell in an entirely different environment than we're used to. And it's high pressure. They sell here. So when a doctor says that they have a 60-year-old patient with a bone density of XYZ with a compound complex fracture, they have to be able to say what hardware is best to use in this situation. So their sales actually happen when they're in this type of pressure world. So you can imagine the compliance requirements around the sales team in here and getting something incorrect. So quite a challenge if you're in sales. Another one of the people we deal with is Fresenius. They actually manufacture kidney dialysis machines. Not only do they manufacture these machines, they also teach the nurses. And in this world, nurses, you already have to be a qualified nurse, so you have to be a registered nurse, and then you would specialize in dialysis. So again, that doesn't sound too difficult. In order to manage and create through that area, there are about 32 competencies or compliance areas that they need to deal with. And that sounds okay, that there's 32 and the program goes over 10 months. Now you actually manage it and you scale it out where they have 1,000 nurses learning in 1 year. That's 32,000 data points that they have to keep in touch with on an annual basis. So to try and do this manually is quite a challenge. And finally, the last guys in my list, and certainly by no means least important, is the people at Cathay Pacific, a worldwide airline. We've had an association with Cathay now for more than 15 years, and we all know that planes have pilots. Excuse me. The interesting part about when you become a pilot is you start off as your initial training, and then once you actually qualify, you do these things called recurrent checks. And you can have a recurrent check A, a recurrent check B, and you do this for every aircraft type that you might fly in. It generally means you sit in a simulator and somebody's going to watch you and check what you're doing based on different processes or challenges that they might give the pilot to test. One of those challenges might be flying in icy conditions, and they'll simulate that, or they'll switch the runway lights off, or something like that where they have to check. And you have to do that every 6 months. So if you can imagine that Cathay Pacific has a multi-fleet, they have both Airbus and Boeing, so the pilots can fly multiple aircraft. So when you've got around about 2,800 pilots on multiple aircraft, now you can see where these checks need to be scheduled in time. If a pilot has not done their recurrent check, they can't fly. So could you imagine us as being having a driver's license and having to do a check every 6 months? I reckon half our roads would be empty. I actually live in Thailand, so all the roads would be empty. So when we hear about compliance, generally this is our first reaction when we're hit with an audit. So the idea is to come and run and hide as quickly as possible. And so what we try to do is we work with organizations to take the fear and, even more importantly, take the risk of compliance away. And again, we're looking at the risk of non-compliance as opposed to the risk of compliance. So I did a survey quite some time ago, and I just asked this 2 questions. So question number 1 was, how important was compliance training? And amazingly enough, out of the questions from about 310 respondees, about 66% of the organization said that the monitoring of compliance was either critical or very critical to their organization. So then I would think, and I'd ask another question from the group, and it would be, so out of that compliance requirement, what type of systems do you use? And I put 2 manual and 2 automatic types up there. And again, amazingly enough, it came back that it was a split between half manual and half automated. Now, if you have, you run those statistics down at 100 companies, and at 66%, you've got 66 companies who actually think it's important. And out of those 66, only 33 of them are using some sort of electronic means to manage these highly complex compliance areas. And that's where the risk looks at. Because we know that the manual processes can be tedious, timely, and full of errors. So we've been encouraging organizations, and that's why we've gone down the compliance route, is to move across to something that simplifies, automates, and reduces that risk. So what do you do if you really don't know where to start? I mean, most people would actually start to turn to people in their network and their group, and they would ask people what they do, and maybe they would mirror the same processes. Are those processes correct, or are those processes incorrect? Nobody knows until they try. So to break things down in compliance fairly easily is, if we have a look, compliance is all about people doing things. So we take our audience, we take our people, and the more, the more staff we have, the more complex it gets. Now, if we take some processes, and again, if we take complex processes or multiple processes, we then start to add those to people, the complexity starts to rise. If you have a look at a pharmaceutical organization, it's not uncommon to have 300 or 400 standard operating procedures in producing, the drugs. And the machine operator needs to be aware of several hundred processes at any one time. And they change almost weekly. So again, it becomes complex. Added to that, with our people and our processes, we get audited. And being audited, it means to be able to prove that you do what you say you can do. So if you say that a person on this particular machine has been trained in a process, they're going to check to see that you actually say what you do what you say you can do. And that's as simple as it is. So how do we look at that as technology people? So we have to look at people, we have to take processes, and we have to take auditing, and simplify that so it makes it an everyday event, but not an event that takes time away from people doing their job. So, okay, so where do we start? That's the basic reaction I get from most when we start talking about managing their compliance with a solution. So the first part that we look at is we look to make sure that each of the people in the organization have their job identified. And that's really the key step. Has the job been identified? Have the tasks of that job been identified correctly? And are they documented? Amazingly enough, we find a high level of companies who haven't even got to this stage. So we haven't even got to the area where technology can help until we have everybody's roles very clearly defined and what needs to be managed. Then we have to give, the time where we can look at the people, in their day-to-day world and make sure that they can succeed. We don't want people to fail in their job. We want to keep them very much on track of where their job roles are. So, you don't want to put people at risk, and you want them to be in a happy environment. So what we do, and again, this is Net Dimensions and what we do it, and your systems may be slightly different. But we do start with, making the job profile. So the profile at the top is really just a statement of what this profile is. Down the bottom in the base of the screen, we really have what are the competencies or compliance areas that these people need to deal with. So in a job profile, we've put their actual generic title. It could be machine operator, it could be 777 pilot. And each one of those compliance areas can be named as a requirement. And you can have a level of requirement, but generally in competencies, you're either checking a competence or you're against compliant, be compliant or non-compliant. That's the easy check. What we then do is we say for any one of those job roles, what is the acquisition of that knowledge? And most simply, you can say, if a person has completed training, then we can say that their actual compliance is met. And that's how some people do it, and some organizations, particularly where training might be reading a standard operating procedure. You can go one step further and say that reading the procedure is okay, but answering a series of questions about that procedure is even better. So the actual acquisition is now not only a training module, but it might be an exam. You can also have some more formal assessment, which could be something to do with a 360-degree or multi-rater competency assessment. Not too many people in the pharmaceutical industry do it that way. They tend to do it based on understanding of the standard operating procedures. Pilots also do it from a checklist in an exam, not through the observation of other people. And then finally, what we think down the bottom here is that we link the requirements to whatever learning event can give them that knowledge. So in this case, 3 different learning events can give people the knowledge on this one area of compliance. And most importantly for us is what we have done is we've made the revision of that learning event the trigger. So let's take a pharmaceutical once again where a machine operator has a standard operating procedure and they are deemed compliant against that procedure. So that's okay for them. But the minute that procedure changes, it gets revised and a new revision is now published. So what we do with this setting is as soon as that standard operating procedure is revised, the competency can be taken away from the worker. And this is done automatically. And I'll show you in a few more screens visually what happens. But more importantly, what we also do is we allow a grace period. So that standard operating procedure might change, and it could be in the next shift or the next week that the new procedure will come into place. So by adding a grace period, we can advise the staff member that the current process is no longer valid, and they have a certain amount of time to understand and learn the new process before they will become non-compliant. And what this enables us to do, and what I call it, is predictive non-compliance. We can say when an audience will become non-compliant as opposed to being non-compliant. As I said earlier, if you are non-compliant and you get audited, it's too late. So how does that look like in the day-to-day running? So once all of this is all set up, you don't have to touch all of the setup once again. As people join the company, they are assigned the job profile, the learning is assigned to them. When they complete their learning, the status of their compliance is actually changed. So it looks fairly simple for a staff member to quickly review how they're looking in terms of their job profile. They can have more than one job profile, so the screen can have as many job profiles as you like. If you have a green tick against the upper level boxes in here, that means that you are compliant in all areas of this requirement. If you have a red area, it might mean that you definitely need to do some work on that. And if I have a look a little bit further down on this area, I've got a red, which says I haven't completed or haven't even started, and a green means I have. So for me, I'm able to see where I am based on my job role and my compliances. If anything changes, this is very dynamic, it's in real time, so I would either gain a tick from doing something, or if a revision changed, I would lose that information. All the time, every time that something happens in my training plan or my learning path, I'm given an email that will tell me that something has changed. So I can be brought to attention to this screen, or if I wanted to have a behavior, I could log in each day and look to see how I'm looking. So this is at the staff level. We need to move up a little bit further though, and we need to look at our supervisors, because supervisors look at multiple people and they need to know very clearly at any point in time what their staff look like in terms of their compliance. So if I switch to a manager view, and in this case at the top I've actually got a tab that says I'm a direct appraiser, which means these people report to me directly. So very easy for me to actually look down as fast as possible, and I can see anything that's in here, whether it's a green checkbox or it's a red triangle. And red triangles are the things that we're trying to get rid of. If I just take a person like May here, and May's the engagement specialist, and I can click on May's name and I can drill down a lot further to see exactly where May is missing that information. So I can see that, in an area such as this one, although the learning has been completed, it wasn't at the level that was required for this compliance area. And in the area down below, one of the areas has been missing. So all of this is very dynamic and easy to see. So I can get on the phone, or I can quickly send May an email that says, hey, look, we really need you to be compliant. can you get things done before Friday? And also in this checkbox area or the symbol area, if there is a yellow dot against any item, this means that they're in that grace period. So this is the area where I can say, I've got a person who is in that gray area between being compliant of an old standard and being non-compliant in a new standard. So we can speed people up a little bit, based on the information that we can see on this screen. Once again, the important aspect of this is that it's in real time. So there is no delay between somebody completing something and the status changing. So we take that one level further. So we're at the manager level. Now let's go up maybe even to an operations. So a complete operations area might want to see where they're not really looking at the individual as such. They are looking more to how is the entire plant looking in terms of compliance on any particular area. So we have an area called compliance analytics, and we can filter this based on an organization, or we're going to use a job profile or a user group. So in this example, all I've said is, give me the entire organization and the different plants involved, and I really want to be able to see if they're compliant in these 3 particular areas. So by this screen, I'm not looking great. No one's really compliant, except for, plant number 1 has a certain level of compliance. So we know out of their people that, 1 out of 9 people are doing something in that process. I can actually just take a small click on the individual organization, and I can drill down. And here I can see that May's doing okay, but everybody else in that division has not completed anything to do with this compliance. So very quickly I can hit a checkbox on all of these, and I can shoot out an email straight away to everybody from the system that says, hey guys, pick it up a little bit. We really do need to be compliant by next Friday or we're all in trouble. So we start to be a little bit more proactive because of the fact that we have knowledge at our fingertips. If I need to look at any particular person, at this point in time, I can click on a person and I can find out. If they're non-compliant, one of the reasons might be that they've never been assigned the training. It's never turned up on their training record, or they may be that they started the training, but they never completed it. So with this information in hand, we can direct back to the staff member, and we can sit there and say, let's get moving, guys. Let's move it ahead. And as an example, we at Net Dimensions, we follow an ISO process. So anybody that is dealing with contracts or sales, one of our ISO processes around contracts. Every time something changes in a contract, I get an email that tells me I have to redo my training around contract compliance. And again, I have a particular time frame in order to complete that. And lo and behold, I get an email about 3 days before, since I haven't done it, that tells me I need to do it by the 3 days. Once again, we will end up with an ISO non-compliance if I don't make it by Friday, and that's something my CEO definitely doesn't want to happen. So we use our own tool to manage our own compliance. Excuse me. So if I have a look at a summary for that, today is not about teaching you how to do everything. It's about, painting a new picture on how things can be done. Certainly around your compliance world, you have to communicate that compliance requirement in some way. And emails, one-off, are not too effective. Visualization of the requirement is very effective, and constant communication to the staff is also very effective about when these compliance requirements need to be done. And learning and development people, quality managers, really don't want to be sitting around sending emails to people every day. So a system needs to take care of that. Most importantly, you need people to be able to succeed at it. There's no point putting a a very risk-adverse compliance process in place if people can never achieve it? And then finally, you've got to audit this again. One of the benefits of a technology-based solution around compliance really is you are continually and continuously auditing your processes. You're auditing the data in real time, and you're able to act on that data in real time. So I just leave everybody with this final one, as I mentioned earlier. Some organizations turn to their network to see what they were doing, and they follow that process. So there's nothing to say that that process is right or wrong, but if it's wrong and everybody's doing it, it actually doesn't mean it's effective. So we tend to spend a lot of time with people discussing the processes, managing that thought processes before we even put it into the technology as a part of our process. So for me, that concludes my part of that presentation on what we do using in technology and using those processes. So if we can open it back up to the team at DDLS to open up for questions.
Okay, can you hear me, Steve?
Yes, I can.
Excellent news. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining in. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to actually ask Steve? Or what we'll do is we can answer some questions if you have them. Apart from that, as a training provider with DDLS and a learning provider, we certainly work very closely with Net Dimensions in terms of helping organisations become compliant and make it as easy as possible. We'll help you to build out the solution that you actually need that will make sure that your organisation are doing everything that they actually are required to do, whether by law or by the organisational governance, to support you in your program. Feel free, you can always email us as well at training@ddls.com.au. My name is Kirsty McGrath. I'm the product manager and I look after e-learning here within the Sydney office, and that's where I'm based if you ever need to have a chat with me as well.
Kirsty, I did forget one thing as I was running through. We do actually have a white paper, and it's called Compliance in Your LMS, a practical guide to make compliance easy. So I would say if any of the people on the call would like a copy of that, please contact Kirsty, and we'll make sure Kirsty has that to distribute out. And most certainly we can help you understand how that's effective. So please go to Kirsty, and Kirsty, I'll make sure you have a copy of this.
Okay, what we can do is after the session we'll tell you where we've actually got the recording, and if you like we can send out the white paper and any information along with it so that you can have it after the session, so we'll do all that for you afterwards. I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Steve. If there aren't any other questions, we will close off the session for today. Thank you very much for your patience in getting us started, and we will hopefully speak with you all again soon. Thank you very much, Steve. I'm not seeing any questions coming through at this point.
Okay, thanks, Kirsty.
Okay, thank you, everyone.